So this week I would like to speak a little bit about Parshas Shemos, and I would like to. I have a few main things to speak about, but the last thing I'd like to speak about, and I think the most important thing that I'm going to speak about, is the 5 character traits of Moshe Rabbeinu that I think that, in my opinion, that I think that's what made him special, made him a leader. So even if the other things don't interest you as much, please stick around and stay for the last. I think it might be interesting. So first, I'm going to speak a little bit about just what Sefer Shemos is about, and a few things in Sefer Shemos about the process of slavery, how it started, and all of that. And then, basically, last, I'm going to speak about Moshe's greatness. So we have to understand, and this Ramban brings at the beginning, when he starts Sefer Shemos, he points out that Sefer Shemos, in English, by the way, it's called Exodus. But Sefer Shemos is, according to the Ramban, Galus and Geula, exile and redemption. So it's going into Egypt and going out of Egypt. So in English, it's called Exodus, exiting Egypt. But really, it's the galus, the exile, and redemption. So it's both sides. And of course, the main thing is redemption towards the end. I mean, already after the first few parshas, it starts redemption, and the reason it talks about the Har Sinai, getting the Torah, getting the 10 Commandments, and all the mitzvahs and all the Torah, and the building the Mishkan, is because that's when we have purpose. I mentioned this in the self-growth video that I did this week, which you should check out. So the real redemption is only when you become a slave to a real purpose, a good purpose. So that's when they really were redeemed, when they finally had a purpose and were serving Hashem. So let's start. Let's start with B'nei Yisrael. These are the names of B'nei Yisrael that came to Egypt with Yaakov, and it mentions all the names in short. So Rashi. So there's a question over here. We mentioned in Parshas Vayigash, at the end of Bereshis, we mentioned everyone that came. We mentioned, and now why do we have to mention them again? So Rashi talks about how much Hashem loves B'nei Yisrael and how He counts them time and time again and all of that. The Ramban has a different explanation over here, and he says because really what was important for us to know and was important for us to understand was the redemption, was the exile and redemption. That is the natural continuation of the Torah. But the Torah at the end of Sefer Bereshis sidetracked it. At the end of Genesis, it sidetracked it and spoke about Yaakov's death and a few things that happened after that and how Yosef died and all of that. It finished because Bereshis has a different theme than Shemos. It was about the Avos and all of that. Therefore, it had to finish that. But really, from the second they came to Mitzrayim, a new story starts. And it intertwines with Bereshis. So you understand it's like two strings connected. Let's say one thing connected to each other, and the other one story and the other story overlaps it. And that's the situation over here. So Shemos, that exile, started when B'nei Yisrael came down to Egypt. Sefer Bereshis didn't finish then, but that's when it starts. So therefore, it's finished. It's starting Sefer Shemos from that pasuk itself, where it talks about these are the offspring of B'nei Yisrael coming down to Egypt. It brings it, and then it mentions them in short because it already mentioned them before, and then it continues about the slavery, and it starts with that theme instead of the theme of Yaakov living over there, and then Yaakov's death, and the brother's death, and Yosef's death, and all of that. So that's the reason it starts with counting B'nei Yisrael. So now let's speak about the process of the Galus, how it started. So the Torah says a new king came over Egypt who didn't know Yosef. In other words, he didn't have gratitude and thank Yosef for what he did. Doesn't mean literally he didn't know anything about him. Of course, there's history and everything. Everyone had to know him just a generation after Yosef. So it means he didn't have. That's why, according to Rashi, he brings two opinions. Some say that he didn't know Yosef. Some say that he acted like he didn't know Yosef. But according to either opinion, the answer. A new king came on Egypt. So some say it was really a new king, or some say he acted like a new king. But everyone agrees that he acted like he didn't know Yosef. Like Rashi brings that, according to every opinion, he agreed. He acted like he didn't know Yosef. In other words, he didn't care. He ignored everything that Yosef did. And he said, "Behold, B'nei Yisrael are becoming more strong, are becoming stronger and more vatsumi men, or they're going to become greater than us. Let's become smart over them, perhaps because maybe they'll increase and a war will happen and they will add on with their enemies because they're not us. They're in Goshen. One of our enemies will come, and then they'll decide to join them and they'll fight with us, and then they'll go leave out of the land." So the question is, what is over here going on? What? They weren't slaves yet, B'nai Yisrael. So there's two things it could be. B'nai Yisrael were helping a lot Egypt in a lot of ways. They're giving blessing and all of that. But I was to say the more simple understanding is that they were they'd go out of Egypt with all Egypt's treasures and all of that, and make Egypt a mockery and disgrace. So therefore they decide to make them slaves, which by the way would help them. It's like the opposite. We're worried that B'nai Yisrael are going to make us a mockery and disgrace us and all of that. So we're going to make them slaves, and then they'll have to help us and make us more powerful and us greater. So that's what they did. Now the stages of slavery are pretty clear in the Chumash, and I'm going to go basically based on the Ramban's way of understanding it. So first they started by Simo Alav Surei Misim. They put on ministers of tax, Leman Anosai B'Sivlosam, to afflict them in their burdens. Leman Anosai, it talks about B'nei Yisrael, about the nation of Israel in singular. Anosai, to inflict him, it. B'Sivlosam, in their burdens, meaning the Egyptians' burdens. In other words, B'nai Yisrael then weren't yet doing what the Egyptians were doing. They weren't building pyramids. They weren't doing all of that. And Egypt were building the pyramids. And they decided to add, or maybe they had other slaves also, but then they decided, no, we'll use B'nai Yisrael to do our work. In other words, they were saying at the beginning, be part of us, be like us, take on the burden that normal Egyptians are taking. You have to be an Egyptian. So they built the storage houses, and they started afflicting them more and more, meaning they want, So the kasher yanu is but as they afflicted them, they increased. So B'nai Yisrael, so this is the next stage now. When they saw that B'nai Yisrael increased, Vayavidu Mitzrayim as B'nai Yisrael befarach, and Egypt work B'nai Yisrael in hard labor and work, not just for the tax or whatever. What was the tax, by the way? It was the people. They'll take a certain amount of people, a certain amount of months a year. You have to come and work, and then they increased that and made the work harder and everything. They helped them with the work less, and that's basically. And they bittered their lives with hard work, the chaymer, and like the cement and all that, and the bricks, all work in the field. All the work that the Egyptians used to work in hard labor, they made the Jews do now, B'nai Yisrael. So, and the Ramban points out when we say Vayavidu Mitzrayim, when Egypt worked B'nai Yisrael b'farach, it means that after they took people for tax and made them, let's say a third of the Jews of working at certain different months of the year and all of that. Then when they saw that it wasn't working, they let every Egyptian take a slave, and he could use him for all the work. And that's why it continues in the bricks and in the cement and bricks. That was the work for Paro, and then all work in the field was for any Egyptian that wanted. They would take slaves. And then the king of Egypt told the Miyalders, the midwives, that one name was Shifra, one was Pua, and he said basically right when whenever you help someone from the Jews give birth, right when they're born, check and see, are they a boy or a girl? If they're a boy, kill them. And then, it'll look like an accident, like it happened from birth, or that they're really sick and died right after birth, whatever the case is. So, but the women you could keep. So, what was Paro's sinister plan over here? The idea was they won't increase and they won't have a Jewish identity. And because although we as Jews, we consider the mother continues the Jewishness, but the Jewish identity, a nation can't stand without the father is the identity of the nation. And basically their plan on, will stop the men from being born, and then they won't continue their nation. And the women, okay, so there won't be men, so then the Egyptians will get to marry those women. That was Paro's plan. And he said, so this is what he wanted them to do. So, but the Mayaldos feared. And now Paro, why didn't he tell them just to kill them, or tell his other people, tell his army to kill them, or something like that? The answer is, at the beginning, he feared doing this. He didn't want there to be an uproar from the Jews, nor did he want there to be an uproar from the Egyptians saying, oh, the king is getting the case. If you do things slowly and they're just slaves and all that, okay, but then now the king's starting to kill them, the babies purposely, then it would cause an uproar, even from the Egyptians. So therefore, he decided to do it secretly. But when he saw that didn't work, then finally he let all chains loose, and he told all the Egyptians, whoever finds a baby boy, just throw him in the river. A baby boy from the Jews, just throw him in the river. Okay, so that's it. Now, this time, Moshe is born, and he doesn't get caught, and he gets put in this little basket, and basically Basia, amazing story, like how everything works out so perfect. Basia, the daughter of Paro, found him and didn't decide to throw him in the river, didn't listen to Paro's command. Rather, she didn't listen to Paro's command. Rather, she saved him. And not only that, she brought him to Paro's house. And so Moshe was raised in royalty, and he basically became like a member of that royal household. And so basically Moshe grew up in royalty while all his brothers grew up in slavery. Now you would think someone who's going to be the redeemer, you'd think the opposite. He should grow up in slavery to be with them. But I think over here, I thought about it a little bit. I think perhaps it was for a good reason. You need a slave doesn't have the means always to save himself. Now, by the way, all B'nei Yisrael never had the means to save himself. That's why they had to have Hashem. But Hashem brought a leader that would have the strength and the capability to do that. And he chose Moshe. He chose Moshe and wanted Moshe to be in royalty. Therefore, he would think different than a slave mentality. But not that he would be above them. And that's what we see the next character of Moshe, when he grew up and he went out to see his brothers. I mean, he knew he was a Jew. When he knew he was from the nation of Israel. When they told him, if they told him straight away or figured out whatever it is, we don't know. But whatever the case is, he knew that he was from B'nei Yisrael, and he went out vayar b'siflisam, and he looked to at their affliction, meaning he felt the pain and looked at it, and it bothered him. And so these are already two things about Moshe Rabbeinu. The first thing is that he grew up in royalty. The second thing is that he cared for his brothers. He cared for B'nei Yisrael. He didn't think himself above B'nei Yisrael. Third thing is, he saw a man he saw an Egyptian striking a Jew, and he took action. So this is the third thing about Moshe Rabbeinu, that he didn't just speak and he didn't just feel something, but he felt so strongly that he took action. And I think that's one thing that we're lacking nowadays, taking action. So he took action and he killed this Egyptian, and because he took action, therefore, this is another specialty about Moshe Rabbeinu. So now Paro heard about this, and he now, by the way, we see that Moshe Rabbeinu was not only kind to his brothers, he was kind to everyone. We see when he went to Midian, what was the first thing that happened? The Yisro's daughters were shepherding their sheep, and they brought them to draw water, and they brought them to drink water. They already drew the water for them, and then the other shepherds came and chased them away to water their sheep from the water that Yisro's daughters drew. So Moshe saw this, and it bothered him, and he chased away the other shepherds. He couldn't stand seeing the pain of someone, his brothers or not his brothers. He couldn't stand seeing the pain of see something, what we call in Hebrew avel, something crooked, not right happening. And he had a very strong sense of justice, and he saved them. Now the fourth thing I think that Moshe Rabbeinu and this Chazal say is he married Yisro's daughter Tzipporah, and he became a shepherd and shepherded their sheep. And then when he saw this amazing sight of a bush on fire but not burning up, and he said, let me check this out. Let me see, what is this all about? And when he came close and he realized, and Hashem spoke to him, he covered his face because he feared from looking at Hashem. And that is another point of Moshe Rabbeinu, and Chazal speak about this, because for the reward of covering his face when Hashem spoke to him. Therefore, it says, Utmunas Hashem Yabit, and the image of Hashem he was able to see. Meaning he got into such high levels of greatness and closeness to Hashem because he recognized he was a human, and he recognized where he was at, and that he couldn't understand everything. And therefore he covered his face, and when he's coming to the holy things, when he's coming to Hashem. And therefore, later on, he was able to understand and get the closest to Hashem. And that's something for us to understand, also to know where we're at, to take in learning and getting closeness to Hashem, not to skip steps, to take one step at a time, slowly, don't skip it all. Realize when you're getting too close to the holy things and not giving it enough honor and not realizing what it is. Don't start something till you know what it is. You realize what you're getting into when you're getting closer to Hashem. This to do with learning. It could be in learning, especially when you're trying to learn Kabbalah and all of that, then you have to know you're getting into things that what do you know? You don't know about. You have to know your flaws to be able to do that. And Moshe knew his flaws, and therefore he was able to become so great. So one more, and the last thing was he was, and this is a little bit connected, he was humble, very humble. And that's and that's the one thing that we don't see in this week's parsha, even though we see it a little bit. But that's the one character of Moshe Rabbeinu we don't see in this week's parsha, but we'll see later on. So yeah, and that's what I think caused Moshe Rabbeinu to become such the greatest leader of all time. And I'd like to see what you have to say about it. What you think was Moshe Rabbeinu's reason to become so? What caused Moshe Rabbeinu to become so great? Of course, we have to understand Hashem chose him, but there's reasons for Hashem choosing him. So if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and send a comment about any of these subjects, about especially the question that I just asked right now, or anything interesting. And yeah, have a good day.